Thank you for inviting me here tonight. I guess my main goal tonight is just to get information out about another environmental problem, and this is a relatively new tree pest that we now have in Eagan. So I should let you know before I start that I did give the same presentation in February to the City Council on a workshop, which was well received there, and also gave it last month in March to the Advisory Parks and Recreation Commission. So that is the goal of myself, my staff, and we just need to get information out about this, like I said, relatively new tree pest. So, and I'm going to bring this point up several times as I talk tonight. I've got a relatively short PowerPoint presentation, but we're at a critical time now with emerald ash borer. It's been around for a few years, but if you know anything about insect populations, they start slow and they'll build up exponentially, and we are in that exponential growth now. So I'll just get going with this. If you do have questions, I'll be glad to answer those, but I would assume I might answer them through the presentation. So, emerald ash borer. I like to start with this relatively scary slide, and this is not something that I made up. This was created by an entomologist from Michigan State University, Deb McCullough, and the title is appropriate on here, EAB Death Curve. So on the two axes here, on the left, the percent mortality of our ash trees, and time is on the x-axis on the bottom, and actually the numbers at the bottom correlate to the current year. We first found emerald ash borer in the city of Eagan in 2014, so that would be the 4. It grew slowly. Right now, 2018, you can see we're at the bottom of that exponential growth of the insect population. I've kind of lived long enough to go through the Dutch elm scare, the oak wilt threat, which is still here, and now emerald ash borer. We weren't sure when this was going to come, and I'll show you a map in just a little bit here, but for the folks that have been through this, the cities and the states that have been through emerald ash borer, they tell us it'll make us forget all about Dutch elm and oak wilt, and the reason for that is the velocity of the damage that occurs much more rapidly. Oak wilt and Dutch elm requires an insect and a fungus. The insect vectors the fungus to healthy trees. Here in this case, we don't have to have that perfect matchup. Now we just have an insect that is literally eating the insides of trees. So there's no if and as there is with oak wilt. This is going to occur much faster. The dash line, the vertical dash line on the right, indicates almost 100% mortality of our ash trees. And if you can see, that is 2022 that will be. So it's coming fast. We need to act fast. Where is emerald ash borer? Both in the country and in the state. The first case of emerald ash borer in the United States was discovered in Detroit, Michigan, and then just north of that in Windsor, Ontario, which is a sister city to Detroit, the summer of 2002. They have determined the best they can that it came over on cargo ships from Asia, probably someplace in China. Inadvertently came over on wood packing material on the ships. That packing material was unloaded in the ports, and it spread unknowingly until they started seeing dead trees. As I mentioned before, insect population takes time to build, so it took 3 to 4 years before they saw their ash trees dying. They didn't know what was happening at that time. We have the luxury now of kind of learning through years of their research and things they've learned, by following the track of EAB. So. Since then, as it says on the bottom, in just 15 years, it's spread halfway across the country. So now it's all the way down to the southern United States, up into Canada, and even as far west as Colorado. It's moving fast. It's not moving fast on its own. Since that can only fly a mile or two a year in its natural flight patterns, it gets moved that fast artificially on other material that is trucked around the country. Actually, it's kind of called, like most insects are that are hitchhikers, they are kind of called the corridor transport. They kind of move on transportation corridors and then spread out into satellite infestations from there. So it's moving fast. It's not just a local problem. This is something we're trying to avoid and how fast it actually goes. These are actual photos of a street in Toledo, 2006, and this is just 3 years later. They lost every tree on that street. We have management practices that we are doing to avoid this year, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. So Real briefly about the biology of emerald ash borer, what it looks like in the adult stage, the upper left, it's a small insect. You can see the size of it on that penny. That's an adult down there. So it's very rare that we see an adult EAB. For one thing, they don't live very long, just in the adult stage, 2 to 3 months, and then they go inside the tree and grow as larvae under the bark. But it is a unique insect. It's a boring insect that actually chews its way into and out of trees. The upper right photo is kind of misleading. It's much bigger than it is, and a lot of people mistake that for a grasshopper. It's not a grasshopper. There's another piece of literature that's out that has EAB lookalikes on it, and we get a lot of green insects brought in to our offices, and that's good. We want people to call us if they see it, so we know where it is spread, but most of those are other types of three-bodied type of beetles, not a borer type like this. When it's in flight, it's got that red underneath, which makes it unique as well. So emerald comes from the emerald color, and then the ash, it only affects ash trees, and then a borer because it is a boring insect. So most of the damage is done when the tree is in the larval stage underneath the bark of the tree. It does do damage, some damage to trees as an adult where it eats leaves, but trees have many leaves on them, and that is very insignificant. So, but when it lays eggs, the borers do what all young things do. They need to eat, and they are eating away the inside of the tree. The bottom right photo is of a tree that's fairly well infested, and those are insect galleries from that larvae chewing its way around the tree. What that does is interrupts the water flow. It goes up and down the trunks of the trees, just inside the bark, and basically it just makes the tree wilt and die, just kind of dries it up. So if this photo or video works, and if you can click on that, Jared, it's just like a 30-second video.
Oops.
Come back.
It's hard to find good help. There you go.
It is.
That might explain kind of the life cycle real quickly.
Should have had this ready.
Did work last time.
Yeah, it did. It's working.
Here we go. Be even better in sound, but
Yeah. No, like we had to do something before to get the sound to work, but
so one female lays about 80 eggs. Here it's turning into that pupa stage, and here it's emerging from the trees, which is going to occur within the month, weather dependent. And that is what we're trying to avoid, basically. So basically, I was just showing that the adult lands on the bark of the tree, lays about 80 eggs. When they hatch out, they go into the tree, not out, and chew the bark from underneath. I should get rid of videos. They never work that good.
yeah.
Okay. So that's the problem with the tree. It's just kind of eating the tree from the inside and out. So how do we identify ash trees that are infested with emerald ash borer? And to tell the truth, we do most of that during the dormant season right now, February, March, and April. It's a lot easier to see the damage caused when we can actually see the limbs of the tree, the leaves covered up in the summertime. The two photos on the left are kind of faded out on purpose. That used to be what we look for, kind of overall tree decline and then suckering on this tree trunk. A lot of ash trees have that, though. Ash trees are probably not the most prettiest tree. They don't grow like a maple or whatever. They have a lot of branches that break off. So overall tree decline is not real conducive of to EAB in the tree. What we are looking for, the two photos on the right, and they were actually taken from Eagan trees, is what we call this blonding of the tree bark. And that is a result of the insect girdling the tree on the inside, basically making it scab up, and then that bark starts falling off. So those lighter colored branches it's from a tree that is heavily infested, and those branches would be dead from there on up. The photo on the right is also something we look at in February, March, and April. Believe it or not, woodpeckers are going after the larvae in the tree. So if we see woodpeckers in our ash trees, we know that there's larvae in there. And if it's an ash tree, there's a good chance that it is emerald ash borer. There are other borers that go into ash trees, but the emerald ash borer leaves distinct galleries, and that's something we look for on site closer up once we do see these two symptoms. So, and we have seen those in a lot of Eagan trees. So where is our inventory of ash trees in Eagan? We have it in many places. In our parks, 46 of our parks contain ash trees. 750 sounds like a lot of trees, but that's only about 5% of our tree population in our parks. So we're in pretty good situation there. Many other cities and states had over 50% of ash trees. Ash was planted as a substitute for Dutch elm loss and oak wilt loss. It is a good, tough herb tree, but it's been overused. We kind of learned through time not to go through monoculture, and that's going to be my message at the end here. So we have some ash in parks, not that much though. We have more ash on our city street boulevards, just under 4,000 trees. Photo on the left is one that was in Eagan, and the photo on the right is a site that's in Eagan too. 100% ash trees up and down that boulevard. That's what we're trying to avoid. Diversity is always the name of the game, and I've got some suggestions at the last slide, and that's one of them, plant diversity. Private property, residential private property. We do not have an inventory of it, but this is a number that came from Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, kind of a sampling survey they did, over 50,000 ash trees on private property, backyards, wooded areas, things like that. So that is going to be a real issue when those trees start dying, and they're going to be hard to remove. So private residential property and private commercial property also have a lot. Like I said, it was a good substitute for trees that we lost years ago, and has been overplanted. So what are we doing as management activities? We've been managing for EAB as a city staff since 2009. That's when it was discovered in St. Paul. So we are selectively removing the worst first and replacing where appropriate. And we typically remove about 150 boulevard trees each year and about 50 from the parks. We're doing that randomly, so you really don't even know. We don't want people to know, hey, we're clear cutting this street this year and going down the next one next year. So to tell you the truth, you probably won't even know the trees we're removing and then replacing them in the park system. We are protecting high quality ash trees. If you've been to Lexington Diffley athletic fields, all those trees in between the ball fields and those trail alleyways, those are all ash trees. Actually, they're white ash trees that we bought from the East Coast because they have a smaller crown on them. They don't require pruning. They won't hang on over the ball field. So there's a reason that we selected those. And those trees are actually being treated. It's an injection that the chemical goes into the tree itself. We don't put it on the ground, and this is one example. This is actually a boulevard tree that's being injected here. We're currently treating about 20 large diameter boulevard trees. This one here is probably close to 30-inch diameter, so we don't want to lose all our trees. So, and I bring this up because residents, if they're listening, they can be doing the same things, remove and replace, or protecting, high quality trees. Other trees in some more natural areas, we're just basically monitoring that. If we have trees, ash trees that die near trails where people are, where there's a target, we will remove those. Other trees are just going to have to be monitored, and we'll see how that goes. We have a tree inspector who goes next year. He's going year-round, going from a seasonal position to year-round, and he consults with hundreds of residents each year. We welcome calls from residents if they have trees on their property. If they don't know what the trees are, what species, if they don't know they're ash, we'll come out and help identify them. If they do know that they're ash trees, we'll help come on out and give some recommendations like is occurring here. We've come up with this, what we call this decision guide for emerald ash borer. This is not one we made, but we revised it. It's from the Department of Agriculture, and we revised it specific to our area here, kind of middle southern Minnesota. And if you just follow your way through here, it's kind of a flow chart, Begin with the inventory of your trees. Do you have ash trees, yes or no? Follow your way through if you want to save them. Here's kind of how you have to do it. So, one of the decisions from the City Council workshop was that the City of Eagan is not going to require the removal of infested ash trees for several reasons. One, we just don't have the staff to follow up on it. City of St. Paul started doing that, requiring the removal of ash trees on private property that are infested. After a couple of years, they just gave up. They started dying so fast they couldn't keep up to it. So it just isn't practical. We highly recommend it. And that second paragraph down there is why. Ash trees, when they die, very quickly become brittle, just kind of a characteristic of the wood. And when they become brittle, branches will just literally start falling off the trees. It presents a real liability, not only for the homeowners and people that live on the site, But if you decide to have the tree removed after it's dead, I've had this quote from several tree contractors that their cost for removal of that tree will go up 4 times. And that's because they can't get in the tree to climb it. And when they do cut it down, it literally just shatters when it hits the ground. So if people have ash trees in their yard and they want to remove, whether they're infested or not, do it sooner than later. The costs are going to go up quite a bit. So not a scare tactic, but just it's a reality. So the staff has been cooperating with different agencies, and there's just a few examples here over the last few years. This is a study that we are partnering with the University of Minnesota Entomology Department, and this is kind of a herd mentality treatment for trees. Their study is going to last till the year 2020 is to determine if EAB is in an area and we want to treat the trees. Do you really need to treat all the trees or just a select portion of the trees? The less trees you treat, the less chemicals are putting out there. And they're thinking through the study that they'll get the same protection for other, non-infested trees by not treating every one. They're treating every other one or whatever. This is actually a blind study. This is one area they're doing. They actually are studying about 300 trees, the Ron Road Carnelian area, and this is up on Duckwood Drive. So all these trees will have a round silver tag on them, and I don't know, and they don't even know, well, they're not saying right now, but the residents don't know if they're being treated or if it's just a control tree or whatever, but it should have some good results. And again, the green highlighted is, it is a lesser amount of chemical, just as effective as more amounts. So, and no results on that yet, but it'll be coming here within a year or so. We are actually cooperating. This is one we just had a meeting last week. There's a firm out of actually Ontario, Canada, that is working with a local forestry consultant on this biological control of emerald ash borer. It's actually a fungus, and that's the name of the product, is Fraxiprotec. And we're going to be setting traps on this property. It's a commercial property, and they wouldn't mind, because we just met last week. He said, go ahead and mention their name. It's actually on the Blue Cross Blue Shield property, just across Yankee Doodle, and we're going to be setting these traps in about 20 of their ash trees on that site. The idea with these is the EAB is attracted to this trap, and at the bottom of the track there is a fungus, this pad right here, that EAB gets that fungus. It's a natural fungus, and actually it's been used for years and years. They used it for bed bug control, believe it or not, a lot of other pests. But this is a new use. They're trying to see how it works and how effective it is for killing the adult EAB. And that is an adult EAB on the right-hand side, and that is after about 2 or 3 days after being, made in contact. The idea there is that it'll die soon enough that it won't have a chance to lay the eggs on the tree. So each female lays 80 eggs, so it's real promising. We're going to be setting these traps up probably in the next few weeks, and we'll be checking them during the summer when the EAB adult is actively flying, so that's the summer months. So more to come on that. This is the only site in Minnesota where this has been done. It's been done on the East Coast and in Canada, so this is the one site in Minnesota. So we also participated several years ago with the Department of Agriculture on what we call trap trees. And the idea that there was to these trapped trees which are girdled would be stressed, and stressed trees typically attract insects. There are trees that have less immune system, can't fight off the insect. Basically, this really wasn't proven to be that effective, so it's not done anymore. But these were just trees in the park system and wooded areas that would have been removed anyway. So it's always good to do this type of research because, like I said, we're benefiting from things that were done on the East Coast where this wave came through, and people further west will benefit from the studies that we do. So to wrap it up real quick here, what is the future of EAB? I highlight these just one at a time. According to that death curve, this next 5 years is going to be critical. If people have ash trees on that yard, we're strongly recommending to give us a call. Something's going to have to happen. Either going to have to remove and replace the tree or protect it, chemically if they decide to do that, if they have a high value tree, or they will have a dead tree, which is a real liability in their yard. So something needs to happen soon. Again, without any protection, all ash trees will die. There was some thinking at one time that here in Minnesota it gets so cold every winter, and this winter it is, that those insects would die off compared to further east or further south. That's somewhat true, but it takes a sustained temperature of negative 30 degrees to actually kill off these EAB larvae, and that would be the stage they're in, larval stage. We did have that a couple of years ago, and they estimated that maybe 25% of the larvae died that winter, but that's not much. All that does is just set it back a little ways, and they just continue on. So we can't rely on that. So trees aren't treated, they will die. Property owners, please give us a call so we can diagnose the tree condition. Some trees that are just moderately infested, they say 40% affected or less, can be treated, chemically treated and protected. Their protection is almost 100% effective, but it needs to be repeated every other year, because as the tree grows, there's new areas of the tree that don't have the chemical protection in them. So, and that's a cost, so people have to decide whether they want to spend their money on that or just to remove the trees. And again, high quality ash trees are the ones that should be protected. We really don't want to lose all of them. This is a wave that's going to go through that may last 15 years. And once it does go through, there's no more food source for emerald ash borer. It'll just move on. They only feed on ash trees. So when their food source is gone, they die off. So the ash trees may come back. There's actually some areas where some people who are preserving and saving ash seedlings just to get them replanted again, because it is a good tree. It's a good urban tree. Without emerald ash borer, we wouldn't be talking about this. So again, a lot of debate about this, and that's why I put it in red. I read this on our Facebook, the city Facebook page the other day, that this chemical treatment is not effective, and it is. If these companies that they're put it into trees could say that it's 100% effective, they would, because it is almost that effective. Just that nothing's 100%, but it is real effective. So it is a tool that's in our toolbox. So, and again, many ash trees will be removed, if not all of them, they're not treated. So our tree environment will look different. We're going to lose ash trees, and there's some areas of the city, Cedar Grove area, there's a lot of ash trees there. The percentage is much higher there. So people can expect to see changes. It happened with Dutch elm and everything. So, and this is the last point, to minimize the similar catastrophe, Dutch elm, oak wilt, we've gone through it before. We tell people tree diversity. They always ask what they should plant on their yard. Go to a greenhouse, a nursery, take a look, one of these, one of those, one of those. Don't plant all the same thing. So with that, before I take some questions, I've got some of these handouts, and Jared's got them over here. And this is actually what we put. This is kind of our approach to get that information out. We put these in doorknobs and hangers and front doors of houses where we see infested ash trees. So my staff is out doing that right now. And it's just a kind of a friendly approach to how people can deal with it, get some information out to them. The front is a cover letter, 2 check boxes on here. One says your tree is moderately infested, so you do have some options. The next point down is your tree is severely infested, in other words, has to come out. And again, we're relying on people to do the right thing. Again, we're not requiring their removal. Seems like it's not as effective. And the key to remember is the removal before the adults emerge. One adult will lay 80 eggs in a tree. Hundreds of adults are laying eggs on a tree. They'll hatch. We're talking thousands that leave that tree. The quicker they remove the trees, the more adults that spread out. So that goes back to that death curve. If we can do the best we can and control it, that death curve is slowed down a little bit, and we have more time to battle this environmental pest. So take this home if you like, and be glad to take some questions.
Thank you, Gregg, for your excellent presentation. And once again, I'll say to you what I said to Lisa, your time has not been wasted. As a matter of fact, didn't you speak to our Rotary at one point?
Pardon?
Didn't you speak to Rotary at one point?
Not recently, not about emerald ash borer.
I may have to have you over there.
I'm glad to.
Does
Again.
anyone have any questions for Gregg?
I have one, just because I've seen some of these pop up on Facebook posts. So with that chemical treatment, has there been any studies on how that impacts the environment, or are there things that residents should know about that, good, bad? Impacts outside of EAB, or the insect itself?
Well, the good thing about the chemical is that there's several chemicals that have been used, and this is the only one that we're using now because it is injected directly into the tree. There are other chemical soakings you'd put on the outside of the trunk, or what they call a basal trench that goes in the turf just around the tree. You can core holes in the ground around the tree, but we don't like, because we're working on a park system, we still don't like to do that. So we put this directly into the tree. If there, and I don't know, this may come up if there are questions, and there always are, about pollinators, how it affects pollinators. I purposely brought this along tonight, and this is a FAQ that was put together by 3 entomology professors from the University of Minnesota, Ohio State University, and Michigan State University. And actually, it's a good publication, and people just Google this. There's a lot of information out there about emerald ash borer. And I will just read just real briefly here. One of their main points was, will these insecticides harm honeybees, in other words, pollinators? And this is just good information to get out, because people ask us all the time. And real briefly here, the first paragraph, ash trees are wind pollinated, not insect pollinated. So, and they are not a nectar source for bees. It's just that it's a tree, it's a flower that's not used. Basically, the ash trees don't rely on pollinators to move the pollen around. The ash flowers also are produced early in the growing season and are present only for a limited number of days while the pollinators are out too. So there's a very slim chance, as he continues here, about that honeybees will become in contact with the ash flowers, because they do flower, all plants flower. The one thing they do point out is good to mention here that, if people plant flowering plants, which they sometimes do around the base of the trees, it's probably not a good idea to do that in their ash trees that are treated chemically, because then you will have pollinators come to it, and that bloom season is different than the ash trees. So just some things to remember like that. But a lot of study has been done on that, how any chemical will affect the pollinators. So that's actually good news for us on treating ash trees. So.
Are there any other questions for Gregg?
Mr.
Right.
Chair, I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Michael.
You said the winter doesn't kill them because you need this sustained -30. How long do you need that for? For like a week or something, or just for a day or two?
How that -30
Yeah.
temperature? Actually, it's not that long.
I'm just wondering if they'd ever considered some sort of like tape you can wrap around the tree that you just freeze down to -30, in the wintertime, and I don't know, maybe that would kill them.
Sounds like a moneymaker.
Yeah.
Someone come up with that, an impractical
Nobody
moneymaker
patented
probably. No, actually, a lot of studies have been done on that, and I've seen some larvae of one that did happen that winter. They had, believe it or not, they lined up all their larvae that had these dead spots on it, and it doesn't take that much percentage of the larval body to be killed off. So it's actually quicker than you think, but how often do we hit 30 below sustained time?
Right.
It may happen up north, where it's actually going to be more critical. There's lots of ash trees up there in recreational areas where, people go in the summer or the fall or whatever. A lot of those are black ash trees, so and that'd be impossible to treat. So the weather might be in their favor up there. So it's pretty interesting, So, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Gregg.
Okay.